Today's devotion I titled Moving Despite Fear. And we are on day 103. And if you're following along the calendar, it is April 13th. And we are moving right along through Genesis. And if you saw the title, you know that the morning rinse in order to read the Bible through in a year is Genesis 29 through 32. The featured verses for today include Genesis 32, 11, and 12. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make you descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. I love how Jacob was actually reminding God in these verses of the promise that he gave to him. I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. It's so cool that he reminded God of that. But anyway, there's a lot going on in today's morning rinse. We've got Rachel who comes on the scene. Jacob works for her, or works for to obtain her as a wife. Laban, her dad, gives him Leah, her older sister, instead. And then Jacob had to agree to work for another 7 years. And then there's drama with these two sisters. And then there's children that come into play with the drama. And Rachel finally bore Joseph and Benjamin. And then obviously we end with Jacob packing everything up and returning back home. And we're at this moment where he's afraid to meet Esau. And if you remember, Jacob actually stole Esau's blessings years prior to it. And he's about ready to come face to face with his brother, who he deceived. So the question is, how would you feel if you were about to face the person that you deceived and that you stole from? Jacob was in this exact scenario. He was in this situation. He was about ready to meet Esau, the brother whom he not only took his birthright, which we read in chapter 25:33, but he also stole his blessing, which was also mentioned in chapters 27. That whole story is verses 27 through 40. 20 years had gone by. And this was since Jacob had actually fled from Esau. There'd been a 20-year gap. And God had told Jacob, though, to return to his father's land and that God would prosper him. This land is where Esau currently lived. Now, Jacob was faced with that decision to either trust God and face those fears despite the possible death from his potential still angry brother, or to disobey. Jacob, overwhelmed with fear upon hearing that Esau was on his way to meet him, he heard that Esau had like 400 men with him. Jacob continually obeyed. And this is when we read that Jacob separated all of his flocks and all of his possessions into two parts. So if Esau attacked one part of his possessions and family, then the other half would at least be able to escape. And he did not know what this outcome of this encounter was going to be, but he actually believed that Esau was bringing this army of men and setting out to kill him. So during Jacob's extreme fear, though, he reminded God of the promises that God made him. And speaking God's promises will bring that faith and bring that hope to us in the midst of our fears. And this is what Jacob did. He faced his fears, and while facing them, kept moving in the direction that God told him to move and hanging on to the hope of God's promise. Well, despite his fear, he literally remained determined to obey God. And despite his fear, he did not turn back to the comforts that he knew, but instead he moved toward the promise. I mean, do you get that? Despite his fear, he continued to move forward and toward God's promise that he gave. And in fact, turning around was not even an option in Jacob's mind. He did not even pose that as an option of giving up. So he kept walking forward, reminding God of the promise that he had given him back years ago. And even though he was worried about the possibility of losing all of his possessions or even being killed during this encounter with his brothers, he feared God and the consequence of disobedience even more. If we all could fear God more than our earthly fears of what we see in the tangible. I mean, in the logical mind of Jacob, look, you're facing your brother who you stole a blessing and you lied to and you deceived, and you're getting ready to face him, and you hear that he's bringing 400 men with him. From a logical standpoint and a natural standpoint, he's going to die. There's something going on. But yet, he feared God and the consequences of disobedience even more than the fear of death and the fear of losing everything. And he somehow knew that if he would have stayed behind, he may have been able to live physically, but he probably would have died spiritually because of his disobedience. And I think that he probably knew that. And this was a big leap of faith, a big moment of trusting. And my encouragement to you is to keep obeying despite the circumstances that are around you. Keep obeying despite if you have a speaking engagement and the numbers are a little low, or you start up a ministry and the numbers are a little low, or you're doing something else in obedience and the fruit has not yet come to fruition. Keep obeying despite the circumstances that are around you. Keep moving forward despite any fear that you might have of man around you, or despite the fear that things are not going to turn out how you had hoped. Keep claiming God's promises despite the circumstances around you. I cannot express that enough. Keep claiming God's promises and obeying him despite the circumstances that are around you. I'm going to read the featured verses again. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make you descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. Jacob is admitting to God that he is scared of Esau. He is scared of what Esau could do to him. He is scared that he will attack him, and he will attack his mothers of his children. He will attack his children. He is scared of being delivered basically in the hand of Esau, and destruction will come to his possessions and his family. He admits that he is scared in that moment. But also in that almost same breath, he reminds God of the promise and he keeps moving forward despite his fear. My challenge today for you to dig a little deeper is to ask yourself, what has God promised you? Is there an act of obedience that may seem counterintuitive, but you believe God is telling you to obey, even though circumstances do not look like they appear to be on your side? Are you afraid? Is there some fear within your heart? Ask God to help you begin moving towards this promise, despite any fear of his promise never coming to fruition, and ask him to give you one action item today that you can do that will help you begin obeying what God has promised you and what God wants you to do despite any fear. So what is one action that you can do tangibly to move you in the right direction of God's promise, despite your fear, despite what circumstances lay out, despite what may logically be out in the open in what looks tangible, and despite what circumstances look like. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'll give you one of mine. When I wrote this devotional, I had no idea I would be doing a podcast. I had no idea that I would be recording this on a daily basis and getting it out there to you guys. I had no idea any of that. I was just in an effort to obey. I knew I was supposed to get this devotional out there and see what God did. I knew that was supposed to be my mission. When a friend of mine told me about podcasting, yeah, it was a little nervous and yeah, I was a little scared. And then another friend said, you need to start a Facebook group all centered around your devotional. I'm thinking, I don't want to annoy people. I don't want to create this and then fail. Literally, who's going to join my Facebook group? Who's going to watch this podcast? Who's going to continue to move forward? And all the circumstances around me indicated it's might not necessarily be what the world views as successful. There might not be tens of thousands of people joining my Facebook group. And despite those circumstances and despite my fear, I went ahead and said, you know what? And I asked myself this question. This is what I do a lot of times when I'm faced with a crossroads or when I'm faced with a decision of whether or not I do something or whether I don't do something, is I ask myself this question. If I did not do this thing, would I regret not doing that thing? Or if I did this thing, would I regret doing that thing? And I will put myself into kind of a situation where I ask myself those questions. And usually I know, despite the circumstances, I have a sense of regret if I don't do something or if I do something. And I knew that I would regret not moving forward in this capacity if I did not heed some of the advice of a few friends of mine. And whether or not anybody listens and whether or not anybody watches or reads my book or engages in my Facebook group, whether or not they do that at all, I knew in my heart that I was supposed to carry out these steps. Despite the circumstances, despite all of the fears that I had, I knew I was supposed to do it and I would regret if I didn't. So here I am in the second quarter of this being faithful and doing it. And then obviously, you know, Haley, she is now helping me and editing it and stood up and said, Mom, I'll help you with this. And it was almost like I couldn't say no because God had used other people to encourage me to move forward. And then resources for me doing this actually began to come into fruition, which I did not know at the time. It was me having to say, I need help or mentioning it to a few people and them encouraging the idea. And I'm wondering if something like that is also occurring in your life. Are you afraid of stepping out? Maybe afraid of what you might appear, or maybe afraid that it won't be successful, or maybe afraid that you might not necessarily trust yourself to be faithful, or what if you fail, or what, I mean, all of those things can go into our minds, and yet, while my situation was not necessarily physically life and death, I believe that this podcast is bringing life to other people and helping people to grow in God. And so it kind of was a moment of spiritual life or death. Would I rise? Would I rise to help others grow in their faith? And there could be something like that in your life. And also, too, looking at the promises of God. And did God ever promise me that, this book would be, thousands of people buy it? No, he never promised any of that to me. In fact, I don't even know that he gave me a promise about this book other than he would help me get it done. But is there something that God has promised you in your life, whether that's some blessings that he's promised you, or some relationship igniting that he's promised you, or some other thing that is maybe not necessarily in your eyesight right now, but it will come to fruition if you face your fears and if you act in obedience to whatever seems counterintuitive or whatever you're feeling stressed about, I guess. And just ask God to help you move forward in this challenge today, despite your fears of even his promises not coming to fruition, ask him to give you that one action item for today, and then obey that despite your fear. Begin moving forward, depending on him as your guide. Tonight, when you pull out your journal and you write your evening reflection on there, write down what that action item was that God spoke to you about, and write down how you responded. Like, did you begin moving forward despite your fear? Did you begin moving forward into a leadership position at your church? Or did you begin moving forward with getting to church in that first time? I mean, like, if you are still struggling with trying to get into the body of Christ, we cannot do this alone. Just like I cannot do this podcast, I cannot do the things that God's asking me to do alone. I can't. And so maybe it's getting involved with your community church. Maybe it's starting that ministry with the church. Maybe it's helping on a team. I don't know what that is for you, but whatever promise God's given you, that, you know, he has laid it on your heart and said, I want you to do this. This is coming. What is that action item for you to do today that moves you in that direction? And then I want you to write down what you did and what act of obedience you did today to begin moving despite your fear. I hope today encouraged you. And as you read the book of Genesis, and we continually see these stories that happened in Jacob and Esau's interaction, you know that Esau did not kill Jacob. You know that his fears were unfounded, and that he had a great reuniting with his brother, and that Esau had let it all go and was completely blessed as well. So you know the end of that story, and I'm just encouraging you, keep stepping out in your faith despite your fear. And so what are you moving towards despite your fear? Keep going, keep reading. I love the book of Genesis. I really do. I think there's so much richness in these stories that just is very encouraging to me. And I love all of the, I mean, obviously I don't necessarily love all the drama that happens, but I love the outcomes of things, and I love watching people in their act of obedience as we're reading through Genesis. So until tomorrow, keep rinsing, reflecting, and repeating. God bless you.